Look at me when I'm talking to you, boy." Officer Dale Riker's voice cut through the diner like a blade. His hand came down hard across Marcus's face. The crack echoed off the walls. Marcus's head snapped to the side, his cheek slamming against the cold window. The 17-year-old's water glass toppled, spilling across the table in slow motion. "Hello, friends. Welcome to Black Bite Stories. Before we begin today's story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love hearing from our global family." Riker's badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he leaned in closer. His breath reeked of coffee and arrogance. "Next time you laugh when I walk in, I'll make sure you remember who runs this town." His fist twisted into Marcus's collar, yanking him upright. Every customer in Nora's diner froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Marcus's cheek burned like fire, but he didn't cry out, didn't beg. He'd learned early that showing fear only made men like Riker worse. His friends Jamal and Trevor sat frozen beside him, their faces pale with terror. They'd just been laughing about basketball practice, about Coach Wilson's ridiculous facial expressions during drills. Now that innocent laughter had painted a target on all their backs. The heat radiating across Marcus's face pulsed with each heartbeat. Blood pooled at the corner of his mouth, the metallic taste spreading across his tongue. But he kept his eyes down, his body still. Riker had no idea he'd just assaulted the one boy in town whose father outranked every badge in the building. The one boy whose father had spent 20 years learning exactly how to dismantle corrupt systems from the inside out. The autumn sun had been warm when they'd walked into the diner 30 minutes ago. Marcus and his friends had been riding the high of a good practice, their backpacks stuffed with homework they'd planned to tackle over milkshakes. The after-school crowd had thinned to just a few regulars at the counter. Everything had felt normal, safe. The checkered floor had gleamed in the slanted sunlight. The smell of fresh coffee and apple pie had filled the air. Then Officer Riker had stormed in like a thundercloud. His face was already flushed red, jaw clenched tight. He'd just come from a traffic stop that hadn't gone his way. Everyone could see the rage rolling off him in waves. Nora Jensen had looked up from behind the counter, her usual warm smile fading. She'd seen that look on Riker before. Nothing good ever followed it. The boy's laughter had echoed through the quiet space. Trevor had been mimicking Coach Wilson's shocked expression when Marcus made an impossible shot. It was harmless, joyful, the kind of laughter that made being 17 bearable. But to Riker, standing there with his wounded pride and unchecked authority, that laughter became something else, became disrespect, became a challenge that needed answering. "Something funny, boy." His voice had cut across the diner like a whip. He'd taken 3 long strides toward their booth, his hand resting deliberately on his belt, right next to his gun. Marcus's smile had faltered. He'd looked up, confused. "No, sir, we were just talking about basketball practice." The words had barely left his mouth before Riker's hand came up. The slap echoed like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze. Trevor stopped breathing. Jamal's hands clenched into fists under the table, but fear kept him frozen. At the counter, coffee cups hung suspended in mid-air as shocked customers tried to process what they'd just witnessed. A uniformed officer, a child. Unprovoked violence in broad daylight. "Not so funny now, is it?" Riker's voice dripped with satisfaction. His lips curved into an ugly smirk as he straightened his uniform shirt. He seemed to grow taller, feeding off the fear in the room. Behind the counter, Nora's hands shook as she reached for her phone. But her voice came out steady, strong. "That's assault, Officer Riker. On a minor? In front of witnesses." Riker turned slowly, his smirk widening. "Witnesses? I don't see any witnesses, do you?" His gaze swept the diner like a spotlight. Customers quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups or phones. Nobody wanted to become Riker's next target. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed him. Complaints disappeared. Accusers found themselves facing trumped-up charges. The system protected its own. But Nora stood straighter, her chin lifting. Maybe not human witnesses, but that new security system sure saw everything. She pointed to the small black dome in the corner, its red light blinking steadily. HD quality. Upload straight to the cloud. Real nice picture. For just a moment, something flickered in Riker's eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. But it vanished behind his practiced arrogance. We'll see about that. He turned back to Marcus one last time. The teenager still sat perfectly still, one hand pressed to his burning cheek. A thin line of blood had appeared at the corner of his mouth. Stay in line, boy. Next time might not be just a slap. The bell above the door chimed as Riker pushed through, leaving behind a diner full of held breath and trembling hands. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, watching water from his spilled glass drip slowly onto the checkered floor. Trevor grabbed napkins from the dispenser, his hands shaking as he tried to help. Jamal slid closer, his voice low and furious. That was so messed up, man. Are you okay? Marcus nodded slightly, but the red handprint on his face told a different story. I'm calling your father. Nora was already dialing, her free hand gripping the counter, so tight her knuckles went white. Her voice carried across the silent diner. This ends today. The other customers began whispering among themselves. Did you see that? Someone should do something. But what can anyone do? He's a cop. The defeat in their voices was decades old. The weight of too many injustices. Too many times they'd watched and stayed silent. Nora hurried over with an ice pack wrapped in a clean towel. Here, honey. Hold this on it. She turned to check her security monitor, her heart pounding. The footage was crystal clear. Riker's approach, the unprovoked slap, the threat. Everything captured in perfect HD. Already uploading to her secure cloud storage where no one could make it disappear. Minutes crawled by like hours. The ice pack began to melt, cold water running down Marcus's wrist. Trevor and Jamal kept shooting glances at the door, jumping slightly every time the bell chimed. Customers left one by one, whispering promises to tell their parents what they'd witnessed. Promises that would likely evaporate by nightfall, dissolved by fear. When the bell rang again, Marcus didn't look up, but he felt the shift in the air, felt the way the remaining customers went quiet. Heavy, measured footsteps crossed the floor. Isaiah Holloway stood in the entrance, his FBI badge glinting on his belt under his open jacket. His face was completely still, unreadable, but his eyes took in everything. The ice pack his son held to his face, the spilled water, the way Marcus's friends pressed close on either side, protective and scared. Isaiah moved forward with careful precision, each step measured, each breath even. Only someone who knew him well would recognize the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that betrayed the fury building beneath his calm exterior. He crossed the diner floor like a man holding himself in rigid control, like a bomb that hasn't decided whether to explode or defuse. Marcus finally looked up as his father's shadow fell across the table. Their eyes met in a moment of shared pain and understanding. The red handprint on Marcus's face stood out stark against his brown skin, a visible mark of injustice, of a system that treated boys who looked like him as threats simply for existing, simply for laughing. Isaiah's hands came to rest lightly on the table's edge. His voice when he spoke was low, steady, but it carried the weight of 2 decades of federal law enforcement experience. Tell me everything, not a request. A promise that what had happened here would not go unanswered, that someone with real power was finally listening, finally ready to act. Avery Holloway rushed through the door behind him, her nurse's instincts already assessing their son from across the room. Marcus, baby. She slid into the booth beside him, her hands gentle but professional as she examined the swelling. Does it hurt to open your mouth? Any dizziness? I'm okay, Mom. But his voice trembled. He leaned into her touch, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Nora stepped forward, her hands wringing her apron. That monster Riker came in here looking for trouble. The boys were just laughing about basketball. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. He walked right up and slapped Marcus. No warning. No reason, just hit a child in my diner because he could. Then he threatened him, said next time would be worse. Isaiah listened without interruption. His face remained carefully neutral, but his eyes tracked every detail. The ice pack, the witnesses, the security camera in the corner that Nora kept glancing at. When she mentioned the footage, something flickered in his expression. Not quite hope, more like the first piece of a puzzle clicking into place. That video won't last long. Avery's voice was quiet. They'll find a way to make it disappear. They always do. But Isaiah was already pulling out his phone. Miss Jensen, could I see that footage now? Before anything happens to it? Nora nodded quickly, hurrying to her office. She returned with her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm sending it to your email right now, and I've got backups in 3 different cloud accounts. Been dealing with their kind long enough to know better. The video played on Isaiah's phone, crystal clear. Riker's swagger as he entered. Marcus's innocent laughter with his friends. The moment the officer's face twisted with rage. The vicious crack of the slap. Marcus's head snapping sideways. The water glass toppling. The threat delivered with casual cruelty. Everything documented in perfect detail. Jamal and Trevor told their stories too, their words tumbling over each other as they described exactly what they'd seen. How unprovoked it was. How Riker had been looking for someone to hurt. How Marcus had done nothing. Nothing except exist while black in a small town where certain officers felt entitled to violence. We should get him home. Avery's nurse training kicked in. He needs rest and ice for that swelling. Isaiah helped Marcus stand, noting how his son tried to hide his trembling, tried to be strong even when his world had just been turned upside down, even when the people sworn to protect him had become predators instead. Miss Jensen, thank you. Isaiah's voice carried genuine gratitude. We'll be in touch. You take care of that boy. Nora called after them, her eyes fierce despite the fear underneath. And Agent Holloway, make them pay. Make them all pay. Isaiah paused in the doorway, his arm around Marcus's shoulders. That's exactly what I intend to do. The drive home was quiet. Marcus stared out the window, watching familiar streets slide past. Streets that suddenly felt less safe, less like home. Avery kept glancing back from the passenger seat, her motherly concern radiating like heat. Isaiah's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was already working, already cataloging evidence, already planning his next moves. At home, Marcus went straight to his room. Avery followed with fresh ice packs and pain relievers. Isaiah stood in the hallway, watching his son curl up on his bed, watching him look so much younger than his 17 years, watching the weight of systemic injustice settle onto shoulders that should only be carrying the normal burdens of teenage life. Later that night, after Marcus finally fell into a fitful sleep, Isaiah sat in his home office. The security footage played on his laptop for the 4th time. The slap echoed through his headphones, sharp, sudden, cruel. He paused the video on Riker's smirking face, studied every detail, every angle. His mind began mapping the path ahead. Not just justice for his son, justice for every person in this town living under the thumb of corrupt authority. His phone buzzed with a text from one of his federal contacts, already hearing whispers about what happened. This could be bigger than one bad cop. Want me to start pulling departmental records? Isaiah typed back quickly. Yes, financial too. Expense reports, equipment purchases, overtime, everything. If there's a pattern, I want to see it. Another message came through, this time from a number he didn't recognize. I was in the diner today. I saw everything. I'm too scared to say anything publicly, but if you need a statement, I'll write it down. Isaiah saved the number. Sent back a carefully worded thank you. By midnight, he had 6 similar messages. 6 witnesses too frightened to speak openly, but desperate to see justice done. He created a secure file. Started documenting everything, the video, the witness offers, the timeline. Every detail preserved and backed up in multiple locations. because he knew what was coming. He'd spent 20 years fighting corruption. He recognized the signs, the stolen evidence, the intimidation, the wall of official silence. This was war, but this time it was personal. This time they'd touched his son, and that made it different. Made it a fight he would never ever walk away from. Not until every corrupt officer was exposed. Not until every enabler was held accountable. Not until the system itself was torn down and rebuilt on actual justice instead of fear. Isaiah looked at the frozen image of Riker's face on his screen, at the arrogance in those eyes, the certainty that power made him untouchable. He thought of Marcus sleeping down the hall, his cheek still swollen, still marked by that handprint, and Isaiah made a silent promise to his son, to every victim who'd suffered in silence, to the idea of justice itself. They thought they had already won. Badges on their chests, guns on their hips, a courthouse full of friends who looked the other way. Decades of unchecked power that had taught them a dangerous lesson, that fear was the same thing as authority. That silence meant consent. That no one ever came for men like them. Isaiah knew that kind of confidence. He had studied it, watched it rot institutions from the inside out. Corruption didn't announce itself with sirens and headlines. It hid behind procedure, behind paperwork, behind the lie that the system was working exactly as intended. They believed their little town was untouchable, that their violence would be buried under reports, written in careful language, that their threats would never reach beyond county lines, that grieving fathers didn't fight back. They were wrong. They had never faced someone like him, someone who understood that real power wasn't loud, it was patient, it was methodical, it was knowing when to wait and when to strike. Isaiah didn't need to break laws to destroy them. He knew how to use the law like a scalpel, how to pull a single thread and unravel an entire network of lies, how to build a case so precise, so airtight, that not even their friends in high places could shield them. They had local protection. Isaiah had federal authority. He had warrants that crossed state lines, databases that remembered what small towns tried to forget, colleagues who owed him favors not because of politics, but because he'd stood beside them when it mattered. And above all, he had time. The kind of time that comes when grief sharpens into resolve. Outside his office window, the night thickened. Street lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn wailed, long and low. But inside, Isaiah kept working. File after file, timeline after timeline, names, dates, patterns. He didn't rush. He didn't falter. Every detail mattered, because every detail was a step closer to justice. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a reckoning. This town had forgotten what justice looked like. Forgotten that badges were meant to protect, not terrorize. Forgotten that power without accountability always collapses under its own weight. Isaiah intended to remind them. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Interviews, subpoenas, quiet conversations that would turn into sworn testimony. Doors that had stayed closed for years would finally open, because fear has limits and truth has momentum. But tonight was something else entirely. Tonight, in the stillness and shadow, Isaiah Holloway changed. The grieving father didn't disappear, but he hardened. He fused with the agent, the strategist, the man who had spent 20 years dismantling exactly this kind of systemic evil. He became something Riker and his corrupt friends could never intimidate, never buy, never outrun. A force of nature wrapped in federal authority. A father who would burn through every lie, every threat, every obstacle standing between his son and justice. And somewhere in that town, men who thought they were untouchable slept peacefully, completely unaware that their world was already beginning to collapse.